Hello, everybody. Thank you, Beth, for this really, really interesting, fascinating presentation. I'm going to talk about the impacts of mainly estate demolition on people and communities. So there is obviously a lot going on. The housing crisis, as Beth illustrated, estate regeneration, austerity, the Welfare Reform Act, the most recent Welfare Reform and Work Act 2016, and most recently the Housing and Planning Act. There are a lot of things being introduced, a lot of changes to housing policy, a lot of welfare cuts, which are having a very detrimental impact on people's lives. Some direct impacts, some are having an indirect impact, like the 1% rent reductions, which are having a really huge impact on social lenders' budgets, which means that they are going to build less social housing as a result. But there is so much to say. I'm not going to get into the details of this all. I'm going to tell you more about our research, our LSE research, and our experience on estate regeneration. So obviously, estate regeneration has been going on for decades, but over the last 20 years, we have seen an increased reliance of local authorities on partnership with private developers to redevelop estates and regenerate estates. Because there is this lack of government funding, private developers become the preferred partners for local authorities willing to effectively get rid of what has become a burdensome liability to them and replace their housing stock with new mixed income developments. So having private developers on board means they can rely on them to build effectively luxury developments to then cross-subsidize the replacement of social housing, their social housing stock. In London, especially in London and some other housing hotspots in other parts of the country, the southeast, basically in London, the land prices are so high, as Beth said, that London has become a particularly sought-after territory by developers. In London, to date, there are at least 65, probably more, local authorities who have proposed schemes going on in at least 20 out of 32 London boroughs. Obviously, in London, there is this pressure to densification, to build more and more and more housing, and therefore the local authorities are entering partnerships with private developers to build more and more. The government has recently announced this estate regeneration program, also so-called Think Estate program. So they're planning to basically lend money effectively to local authority to kickstart regeneration schemes throughout the country to revive, to regenerate estates. So what's been the impact of large-scale demolition schemes so far? A really interesting report by the London Assembly called Knock It Down or Do It Up estimates that at least 8,000 social rented homes have been lost in London between 2004 and 2014 on 50 regeneration schemes. And the Chartered Institute of Housing is estimating that by 2020, 350,000 social rented homes will be lost through demolition, through forced sale of higher value homes, through the voluntary right to buy, and through conversions from social rented to affordable rented homes. So what we see is a net loss, is a net loss of social housing. Where have these people gone? It's unlikely that they've been able to access shared ownership products. Shared equity, we know it's not enough shared equity properties are provided anyway. So what we think is that basically a lot of these existing tenants obviously have been, because there is a duty, local authorities have the duty to rehouse social tenants. So where have they gone? They've gone into existing social housing, and the knock-on consequence is longer waiting lists in boroughs, in London boroughs and in local authorities, a shrinking, and therefore shrinking availability for people who would need social housing. And where will they go in the future? With this shrinking social housing stock, people in need who can't afford to rent or to access home ownership will end up in private rented homes, being paid for by housing benefit. But with the housing benefit cap, a lot of people will just struggle. So what are the impacts on people and communities? We have done a lot of research at LSE on impacts of estate regeneration, and I've personally spent 2 years working as a community organizer on a council estate in London threatened with demolition where the residents are fighting back. So what I'm going to tell you is based on interviews I've done as a community organizer, but also as a researcher at LSE in 2 London council estates, one threatened with demolition and the other being redeveloped. And I thought the best way to illustrate what's going on was to actually let the real people speak with their own words about what's going on. So I'm going to tell you what the impacts are, and then read you aloud some what people told me. So the first impact, I think, is the fear and uncertainty people have to feel in their daily lives. So plans are announced. It takes years for plans to be finalized. They don't know what's going to happen, when it's going to happen, and this is putting a huge strain on people's well-being and mental health, basically. So this 76-year-old lady, Arabic speaking, she couldn't speak English to the point that I had to wait for her son to come and translate for me. She lives in this estate in London, threatened with demolition. And she said, "Where are they going to put me? I don't know what's going on, what to expect. It's mysterious to me where am I going to be? Well, when will they bring me back? What will they offer me? Nobody contacted me. They sent me some letters, but I don't understand them." So there is this psychological pressure on people. The second impact, which I think is really a big impact on leaseholders, is the affordability gap leaseholders are going to face and the resulting displacement. So basically, the buyback money leaseholders receive from councils or from developers are simply not enough for them to be able to afford a new home in the new development. So there is a degree of leaseholder displacement, which is, I think, around 90% plus, because shared ownership, shared equity properties, which means they're not going to pay rent on the percentage they've not bought, is not provided on a mass scale in new developments. And shared ownership is not really an option for many, is not as appealing as being 100% homeowners to becoming 50 or 60%. So this leaseholder, she had lived on this estate in London being redeveloped for 30 plus years. Her daughter was living there, her parents were nearby, but she had to leave the estate. My ambition was to remain on the estate or near because of the church, my parents, my daughter, and it's actually such a nice place to live. The council offered me 210,000. With that money, I could only afford to buy in the outskirts of London, like Waltham Forest, Edmonton. I remember last year there was a 2-bedroom that I made inquiries about. Very small, tiny kitchen in Edmonton Green, just behind the shopping center. It was 220, and it's not a desirable place. Everywhere around here, no way that I can afford to. And she was living in a 3-bedroom house. Another big impact is due to the fact that the redevelopment timetable is so lengthy and so many things happen as years go by. The phasing changes. So basically, this is having huge repercussions on people's life plans. This is a lady living in one of the phases of this big, massive redevelopment scheme, which was basically, which has 7 phases of redevelopment because it's such a massive estate of 2,000 properties. So she was in phase, 6 years ago, she was told she was in phase 7, and therefore they would redevelop her bit of the estate in such a year, and so they would have moved her in such a year. But then 5 years on, they told her, the developer, due to viability considerations, has had to change the plan, to move the phasing around, to change the phasing, and therefore she would have to wait another 10 years. So she says, they left us in limbo for so long. I would have fought for my transfers years ago if they had told me that I had to wait another 10 plus years. Over the last 6-7 years, the house has really bothered me, but I thought in 2013 we might get a move. I've never thought of myself as being a depressed person, but now I can admit it, this is definitely making me depressed. Hearing the developers saying that our blocks are not viable felt like a prison sentence. And this is related to to the issue of demolition blight and lack of maintenance. So whenever an estate is put forward for demolition, the council immediately obviously stops investing money in, they obviously have to carry out basic repairs, but they stop investing money in upgrading, in more structural, sometimes much needed interventions. So this lady was living in a block which was falling into these repairs and had been falling into this repair for years. And she was living with her autistic brother in a flat, in a tiny flat, with mold everywhere and a piping system dating back to the 50s. And she says, this is my life. You can't compensate me for the years that you've made me sit here. I feel very guilty for bringing autistic son. I feel very guilty for bringing my son up in these dilapidated conditions with nothing at the end of it. If I had known, I probably would have moved 5 years ago. My argument with them is, this is my life. You can't compensate my life. This to me is a breach of human rights. They cannot bring back 10 years. We all live in limbo. We can't decorate. We won't buy things for the flat. My son is ashamed of bringing friends here. And then the wholesale demolition is having a big impact on businesses, local businesses, the local economy as well. In this estate being redeveloped, there were 14 beloved, I'd say, local businesses. Only 3 of them were able to relocate in the new premises, because the rents and business charges in the new premises were so high that only a handful of them could actually afford to relocate. And there was also this local business engineering going on, whereby the council and the developer were basically selecting the businesses who they wanted to be on site in the new development. And so a lot of businesses had to leave. The remaining businesses were struggling because, in light of the lack of a well-thought-out retail strategy, what they did was, what the developer did, and thank you, they closed off roads, and therefore the existing businesses were really struggling. This is what a local business owner told me. The first month we were here, we were really struggling. We were down to 70-80%. And that was because there was no access to the shops from across the road. There was nobody in the blocks behind because of the decanting. So financially, that's how bad it was. That's what they want to do. They want to see us struggle, so then we have to walk away. And then they'd have a Tesco here straight away if they could get rid of us. So why is this happening? Why all these really negative impacts on people and communities? I think the first reason is because most of these redevelopment schemes are top-down, they're not bottom-up. There is a complete, utter lack of resident control. Who is in charge is the developer. And they use the viability argument to basically justify every decision they make. This is what the project manager of the council told me about the viability argument. It's not about viability, it's about maximizing their profit margins. It's all about assumptions, what the strength of the market will be next year. There is no crystal ball, it's not an exact science. You can swift a variable a little bit and suddenly it becomes very viable. So what this leads us to is the complete lack of trust between major stakeholders involved. The residents don't trust the council don't trust the developer. There is miscommunication, lack of trust. So some of the things I told you about some of the damages could be minimized by thinking through some damage limitation strategies, through better management, but there is something inherently problematic about wholesale redevelopment schemes. The lengthy time scale, the complexity of implementing early decant. How does the future look like? There is a lot of uncertainty. We've seen and we will see a net loss of council housing. But I think the fact that there is a growing, there is a tidal wave of opposition from tenants. And some tenants' campaigns have been successful, at least in holding up development schemes. A CEO of a big housing association told us that they're really, truly worried about residents' opposition. Residents can come up with really sophisticated anti-demolition campaigns. They can hold up schemes for years. And every year lost means money loss for the developer. So redevelopment schemes are becoming more risky for developers. And also, the government is working on a new strategy, on a new national strategy on estate regeneration. And we have been invited by the government to consult. So they've been consulting key people in the field about what's going on. And Professor Unpower has been invited, and I went along. And it was really promising to see that it seems the government is truly willing to learn from people on the field. And they want residents to be protected more. And there is also a recognition of the fact that estate regeneration shouldn't mean full redevelopment. There are other solutions in between, from full renovation, which is what we prefer, regeneration, through infill development, and hopefully wholesale demolition should be the last resort. And then, have I got 1 minute more? Yes. I think there is this widely recognized need for alternative models, community-led housing, tenant control, a lot of social landlords, and hopefully the government are recognizing the need for putting people more in charge and less developers in charge, because they've definitely been in charge of something which is not their remit. They shouldn't be in charge of regenerating estates. And there is also a lot of professional bodies and housing and parliamentary committees are calling on Theresa May to drop the previous government's emphasis on home ownership. And they're calling for the government investing on affordable housing and an affordable housing program. So yeah, I just wanted to end on a positive note to say that it's really important to keep fighting back, to keep proposing alternative models, and keep lobbying the government. Thank you.